Hi, I'm Jerry Sparks, president of AG Financial Insurance, and we've got with us again Rich Hammer, renowned attorney for the General Counsel of the Assemblies of God. And welcome to Risk Management Live. Today we're going to talk about summer camps. It's becoming the camping season, and we're going to be talking about summer camps and how to minimize risk and maximize the rewards. So I guess anytime we keep kids safe, that's going to be maximizing the rewards. So if you have questions while we're talking about this today, you can go ahead at the bottom of the screen, just fill in your question. I'll actually get it on this iPad and we'll try to answer your questions. But, when we look at camps, Rich, and we look at the claims that occur for a camp or for actually churches in general, camps are probably the most hazardous thing that a church normally does when we look at overall cost of liability from a claim standpoint. So if you're going to say, what is the first thing you'd start off with that a church should do to keep their camp safe?
Well, let me just maybe begin, Jerry, by saying that I kind of divide camping into two groups. Camps that are devoted to adults, like an adult camp, a men's group, a women's group, whatever the case may be, a marriage group. When you're dealing with only adults, the risks are different. But I think today our focus is more on camps involving minors. That's the second major category, because there, as you indicate, the risks multiply and they deepen. And I think the two major risks, and believe me, there are many others, but the two major risks that stand out whenever you're involved in a camping activity involving minors are going to be personal injuries due to ultra-hazardous activities that the camp involves, rock climbing, rappelling, swimming, etc. Personal injuries can also occur passively, and we'll talk about that today, such as by insect or snake bite, that kind of thing. And that's number one. A second risk of equal significance to me is the risk of sexual misconduct. I've been involved with many cases involving minors who have been or claim to have been sexually molested in a camping scenario. Sometimes, many of these cases involve like bunk houses where there are multiple children in one facility with one or two adults. And it can be a very toxic mixture. So just right at the start here, Jerry, I think the two major risks obviously are going to be personal injuries and also the risk of inappropriate physical contact.
So let's talk a little bit about the inappropriate contact. So what would you suggest that a church do to try to minimize having a sexual abuse issue?
Well, first and foremost, of course, is to screen every adult who's going to be involved in any official capacity in the group. As a chaperone, as a counselor, it goes by various names. A supervisory staff, they have got to be screened, similar to the church's screening program. So you're going to want to have an application completed. Find out where this person has worked with minors before. Get institutional references from institutions where this person has worked with minors in the past, typically in one or more churches, maybe schools, coaching, teaching, that kind of thing. You've got to get those references. And then have a 6-month policy, like a church, where you don't allow somebody to be put in a position of supervision in a camp who has not been a member of your congregation for at least 6 months. And then I think the 2-adult rule is vitally important, where you don't allow one child to be alone with one adult. And that can be a real problem, Jerry, in a camping setting where you have counselors or adults who are called counselors, and they actually do counseling, especially with kids that bring a variety of needs, emotional and psychological needs, and that can put them into a context that's isolated, where it's the adult and the child in a counseling relationship. That is a toxic mixture that cannot be done. You've got to have at least 2 adults present when there's one child. Now you can have one adult with multiple children. But in most cases, people interpret the 2-adult rule to mean no one-on-one association. That's where the isolation is the greatest. That's where the risk is the greatest. And keep in mind, some people, unfortunately, that have an inclination to molest children, that are perhaps preferential molesters or pedophiles, they will seek out these opportunities. They will want to place themselves in a position of potential contact with victims. So you got to be so careful here. When you're having a children's camp, this is going to bring these people out of the woodwork. I mean, this is the ideal setting, and they're going to be looking for opportunities where they can have contact with minors, and so you have to be vigilant.
One of the things that is often asked, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask you this today, is you talk about doing background checks, but what needs to be in that background check?
Well, I think as I say, you're going to want to be having an application in terms of screening, and you're going to want to do a criminal check, and you want to do a registered sex offender check. You're going to want to contact references. Those are, I think, the most important components of a screening system. And I used to think that criminal records checks were not that, probably that was redundant. Maybe you didn't need to do that if you had the references. But I've changed my mind on that, Jerry. I think criminal records checks are so relatively inexpensive today, and they're so easily obtained that I think you just have to do it. And furthermore, you're going to be evaluated on the basis of the community standard in your area. And when you look at your community, look at the Scouts, look at the public schools, look at all the major charities that serve youth. They all do criminal records checks. And so for you to say, well, we're not going to do a criminal records check, that's going to cost us $5, so we don't want to do that. You're going to be judged by the standard of your community. And if all the other major charities are doing criminal records checks, you are potentially negligent for not doing it. So when I say criminal records checks, there's a number of fine organizations available, but the fact is most of them use the same databases. Yeah. So you want to do a national criminal file, and you want to, of course, do the sex offender registry search. That's the criminal component. And then in terms of what else you can do, you need to get references. So criminal check, references, those are the key. There was the case, Jerry, we've talked about this before, but it bears repetition, where a denomination had a church planting ministry, and they started a church in a particular state. They brought a pastor in. That had pastored a church in Maryland. He'd pastored a church in Alabama, and they selected him to be a pastor of this church plant. And they did a criminal records check, and they came up with no indication of any prior criminal behavior. So they hired him, and he molested an adolescent boy in that church, and come to find out, he'd molested boys in the 2 prior churches in Maryland and Alabama, but those churches decided to deal with it as an internal matter of church discipline. They didn't report it. So the guy had no criminal record. And when the parents found out that the church had not contacted those other 2 churches and received that information, both of those churches, by the way, said they would have happily shared his background. The parents were outraged, and they filed a lawsuit. That resulted in a $12.5 million judgment against that church. That has since been reduced, but that's what the jury awarded. So you can see the intensity of the emotion of the jury, that you did a criminal records check, but that wasn't enough. Doing background checks involve a basket of activities or responsibilities or tasks that include, yes, a criminal records check, but it goes beyond that to include doing the references. Where have you worked with minors in the past? Where have you worked as a pastor in the past? That was not done, and that's what made the church liable.
A lot of times when you go to a camp, you may not be the only church that is at the camp. You may have several different churches at the camp. So you may not know some of the other adults. What could a church do to protect themselves, or what should the camp do to protect themselves as far as making sure that other people have been screened, because you only know about the people from your church?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're maintaining or operating the camp, you know, what a lot of churches will do under those circumstances is prepare an adequate form that the other churches complete, certifying that they have screened every adult who's going to be participating in this camp from their church. And that includes a background check, that includes criminal records checks, references. We've done all of that. Have them certify to that. And many churches believe that that transfers that responsibility to that church rather than the camp host.
Sounds good. Now, one of the things that a lot of people do to try to protect themselves, and a lot of camps do, will say, we're going to have an activity participation agreement, or we're going to have an assumption of risk form because we don't want to have responsibility for these children. Let's just talk a little bit about that.
Well, what a lot of churches do. I just am amazed at the lack of awareness on this issue. You know, you do a Google search for camp risk management or something like that. You look at all these hundreds of sites that talk about have the parents sign a release form releasing the camp from all liability for the death or injury to their children. That is worthless. In fact, it's dangerous information because it gives churches a false sense of security. We don't have to be that careful. And that is simply not true. Let me just say this. Parents, this is going to come as a shock to you, some of you, but parents cannot release their minor child's legal claims. Yeah, let me say that again. Parents cannot release their minor child's claims. Parents can release their claims if their child is killed at a camp, what is called often their loss of society, their loss of companionship with their child. That's a legitimate risk, a legitimate injury. But they can't release the church hosting the camp from liability for their child's claims. And so here's a child that's severely injured at a camp because of the camp's negligence. The statute of limitations for filing a claim for that child don't begin until his or her 18th birthday, plus the number of years of your state statute of limitations, which can be 3 or 4 or 2 or 5, depending on the state. So if you're looking at an injury to a 12-year-old, you're looking at a decade or more, usually, of time before that minor has to file a claim. And a lot of parents, a lot of churches, they come up with these release forms off the web, off the internet, and they think that this is the panacea. This is what gets us off the hook. It doesn't. Now, we do agree, Jerry, that while release forms don't help the church with regard to injuries to children, there are forms that should be signed, and we've talked about a parental consent form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, parental consent form, basically to document that the parents will consent or decline permission for their child to participate in a camp activity.
Specified activities.
A specified activity. So if they don't swim, my child shouldn't swim.
Well, but they can say on the form, what activities do you not want your child to participate in? Blank. And then the parent fills that in. Swimming. My child doesn't know how to swim. But if they don't, so that's a very important line. If they put swimming down, you better believe that kid better not be involved in swimming.
Or they may be afraid of heights, so we're not going to take them up to the rappelling tower. But it's actually giving the parent a chance to let the camp know what they do not participate in, what they should not be participating in. It'll also have good things like the emergency contact information, a medical release, so if they need to seek emergency service, they have permission to do that. One of the things that is very important is a lot of times it will have a list of the child's medications. You want to talk about some of the ways that comes into effect, especially at camps? Yeah,
their medications, and also I think their allergies or medical conditions that camp staff need to be aware of. So, for example, there's a lot of kids today that are allergic to nuts, especially peanuts. And if you don't gather that information in the registration or the application process, and you're feeding food maybe in utensils in which peanuts were in contact, that can be a significant source of liability. That child may die because of that. So you need to obtain from the parent that information in order to help provide a safe environment. What was the other question?
Actually, just going through the allergies and then
So some kids have medical conditions that require shots or medication, And that becomes a real problem when you have no medical professionals participating in the camp. Who's going to give the kid the shot? So you want to comment on that?
Yeah, actually, in Missouri, I know that we've had people that have had bee stings and/or peanut allergies, and somehow they end up getting something and they start, they can't breathe. It'll cut off their oxygen. And so you have...
Or maybe they have asthma.
Or they have asthma. Normally most camps will have a nurse on site. But technically that nurse cannot administer medicine because she's just a nurse. So when we have a person at a camp that needs some type of medication, we suggest that they get the doctor's permission automatically in case something does happen. An EpiPen. A lot of camps now will actually have EpiPens at the camp, so if somebody has an emergency, they can give that person that shot really, really quick.
And I think it's also helpful to have the parents tell you, what the child's condition is, what the medical need is, maybe in terms of shots or oral medication, and what they would desire that the church do to accommodate their child's condition. So have the parents take the lead on this. And also, you might check with the school that their child attends. Schools face this problem too. Typically, they'll have a school nurse that is authorized to provide the medication or the shots to the child. But those are some things I think the camp can do. That having a child like that does pose significant issues and risks that are unique that have to be managed.
Yeah, actually, one of the forms that I helped put together for a camp has a health history form. So it's going to have their name, parents, age, gender, health insurance company, and policy number in case they have to go to the hospital. It's going to say asthma, inhaler, yes or no. Allergies, bee stings, food, peanut, EpiPen, yes or no. Epilepsy, diabetes, heart condition, orthopedic. Is your child being treated for any injury or sickness? Any medications, foods, or environmental allergies that a participant is allergic to? Does your child sleepwalk? Can your child swim? Does your child have any physical condition that would prevent or hinder them from participating in normal, regular activities? And then routine medications and dosages and reason for dispensing, and then have a medical treatment authorization down at the bottom. And actually, on this form, we actually put down where the physician can sign this form automatically with the prescriptions on this. So the nurse would have this health history form, and they've already got permission from the physician, because the parent can take this to the physician and have them sign this, so there's no issues. So having that health history is really important when you have kids going to a camp to protect those kids. Let's talk a little bit about there are other organizations just besides having a camp like that will regulate camps. So why don't you talk a little bit about the American Camping Association or some states that actually have camping regulations that the camps need to make sure that they're meeting?
Yes, not many, but there are some states that actually require camps, and that term is defined, but typically it will include the normal church camp. And they will contain a registration or licensing requirement that pertains to various safety issues that the church camp must agree to abide by. So it's very important that you become aware of these laws, which typically are at the state level. That's number one. Number two, you have a number of camping organizations, such as the American Camping Association, whose website contains a wealth of information on recommendations to manage risks, best practices, and I think by aligning your practices to organizations like that, you're going a long way to demonstrating that you're not negligent in your activities.
One of the things we often talk about is actually benchmarking. So if you have a camp, you want to know what other camps in your area are doing. So actually you could benchmark, how do you handle this? Do you have smoke detectors in your dorms? I suggest that all of them have smoke detectors in their dorms. Do you have an Ansel system over your cooking system in the kitchen? Do you have fire extinguishers in every building in case something does happen? So there's a lot of things there that need to be there to protect the children. And actually, by going to the American Camping Association, looking what their recommendations are, it will tell you. The other thing that I thought was interesting, actually going to that, is it will tell you how many leaders or adults you need for every camper.
Yes.
By age. So, you need one adult for every 6 campers if they're age 6 to 8. You need one camper to every 8 campers if they're 9 to 14 years old. And you need one adult for every 10 campers if they're 15 to 18 years old. So we know basically how many adults do you need supervising these children at one time. And again, we've already said no one-on-one with one child. So actually, if you're going to do counseling, I had 5-year-olds at camp, believe it or not, 5-year-olds at camp. So we start a little early. But I tell you what, I normally had 6 kids, and we're in a dorm setting. But at night when you're going to bed to say your prayers, and they all start praying for items, it is so great because you might have you may have a child saying, my parents are not very happy. I think they're getting divorced, and it's amazing because you can just sit there and listen, and instead of and we'll say we'll pray about it. But the other kids will automatically say, oh, that happened in my family. And let me tell you how we got through it. And these kids all become a very close-knit little group just during that camp setting. And that's what makes camp so special is that time together, especially at night. But again, no one-on-one. Let's talk a little bit about some of the high hazards that are at camp. I mean, we have mudslides, we have lakes, we have swimming pools.
Inflatables.
We have inflatables. We have the blob at the lake. So if you have, let's just talk a little bit about inflatables. So if we have ATVs, golf carts. Some of our largest claims actually have came from a golf cart.
Yes.
Where we had, the youth leader is driving the cart and he puts 7 kids because he's coming back from the lake up to the camp, and some of the kids don't want to walk, and he's got 7 kids on the golf cart at one time, and he goes over a bump and 3 of them fall off. So any suggestions when it comes to golf carts or ATVs and that sort of thing?
Well, they pose a unique risk, that's for sure. And you need to be aware of, I think, any safety recommendations or standards that apply. There are probably associations that provide guidance with regard to the use of golf carts or ATVs. So I think, again, just like we've said before with the American Camping Association, the more you can align your practice to existing standards in that industry or that field, the more you're demonstrating that you're not negligent. So I'm sure there are safety organizations that provide recommendations in those areas, Jerry. And if you can document that you have followed them, then you've gone a long way to demonstrate that while somebody was injured, that doesn't make you liable. You have to be negligent to be liable. And if you're following procedures by reputable organizations, then you're going a long way to demonstrate the exercise of reasonable care.
I know that one of the camps that I worked at, they had a ton of golf carts going back and forth. First thing I did was basically said, youth leaders can't drive them. It has to be adults, and actually we put limits of age 21 because the youth leaders are not always the safest people at a camp, believe it or not. So,
but there are many other risks, Jerry,
yeah.
In camps, like you pointed out. I think one of the big ones is going to be swimming. You're going to a lake that's opaque. You can't see more than a foot in front of you underwater. And you have a kid that gets into trouble, and that happened in a case we both are aware of, where a girl was in a lake, and she was on some kind of slide that plopped her in the middle of this large lake. It was about 40 feet deep where she went in, and it was opaque. They couldn't see, and she went down. And they had paramedics there as part of the camp, and they couldn't find her for about an hour, and she was at the bottom, and she drowned. I think lakes especially provide significant risk because of the opacity of the water. and you just can't see what's going on down there. So I think when you're talking about swimming events, whether it's at a beach, whether it's at a lake, wherever it may be, it's absolutely critical that you have professionally trained people with certification in CPR that can resuscitate somebody. I mean, that's the worst position to be in,
right.
To have a kid drown and you have nobody there that can help. You talk about negligence. I mean, that could be gross negligence, which can have very serious consequences for the church and the church board, I might add. So those are some, I think swimming is a major risk. And so I know of one camp, Jerry, that for a number of years, they had a in-ground swimming pool at their campgrounds. They filled it in, and they take the kids swimming to a nearby municipal pool. It's actually about 20 miles away, but they put them in a bus and they take them there. And it's a large, almost Olympic-sized pool. They have like 11 lifeguards, and they literally have transferred the risk to the municipal pool. They did have one of their children, a 12-year-old girl, drown at that facility. But the church that operated that camp was dismissed from the lawsuit because they had no control over that municipal pool. And unfortunately, the city couldn't be sued either that operated the pool because of charitable immunity. So that family was left without recourse.
Yeah, going back to lakes, a lot of times with lakes, they don't have rules at the lake. I suggest...
Or the beach.
Or the beach. Yeah. And I suggest, number one, that they have rules. Big rule, no swimming at night. One of the camps that I know about, actually, kids got out and were swimming at night, and one of the kids drowned in the lake. So, and one of the things that the court came back and said, well, it wasn't posted that they shouldn't be doing this. Of course, they shouldn't have been out at 2 a.m. in the morning, but they were. So, but one of the things that the court came up with, it was not posted. So I suggest, number one, that you have rules by the lake. If you're going to be canoeing, you have to have a life jacket on. If you're going to be going off one of those slides and go 40 foot into the lake, or where it's going to be 40 foot deep, wear a life jacket. It's not that big a deal. We had an injury with a blob where one person came down on top of another because they weren't paying close enough attention, and somebody drowned. So negligent supervision. So make sure that your workers know what their responsibilities are, because actually what ends up happening is somebody gets hurt really bad, and nobody meaning for it to happen, but it does happen. So I mean, you and I both have seen a lot of cases at camps where they do say negligent supervision. So we need to make sure that the youth workers actually realize what's going on. If people have questions in regards to activities, such as the blobs or inflatables, we'll be glad to talk to them about that and visit with them to tell them exactly how they should do things or not do things. Swimming pools, if you have swimming pool, those should be posted. They should be fenced so that it's not a public, not a nuisance, but yeah, I guess it's a public nuisance where it's easily accessible and people can get to it very easily. They should have the pools. One of the things for swimming completely is having a bracelet.
Yes.
A red bracelet means you don't get in the water. A yellow bracelet means you can only be in shallow water, and a green means that you can swim. So let them have a bracelet and test those people before they come. Let's talk a little bit about insect-borne issues. We had a case here not that long ago, which was a Supreme Court case. Let's talk just a little bit about that, because I know we're starting to run out of time, but how that changed things on responsibilities for churches with camps for ticks, mosquitoes, snakes. Talk a little bit about that.
We've mentioned that briefly in a previous presentation, but the basic idea, it's called the Hotchkiss School case. Hotchkiss School is a private preparatory school in Connecticut. They sent a bunch of kids to China for a month, and during the trip they were hiking in the mountains, and one of the girls, 15 years old, contracted tick-borne encephalitis. They had to ship her back to New York, her home, and her parents, she suffered permanent brain damage because of this condition. And her parents sued the school and won a $42 million verdict. And the reason was negligence. that the school had been negligent in not protecting their daughter against this. And the main culprit was they didn't check with the Centers for Disease Control website that lists risks around the world to be aware of. And there it was, North China, tick-borne encephalitis, right on the website. They didn't read that, they didn't see that, and they didn't institute precautions that are mentioned right there on the CDC website. So when you're taking kids to a camp or organizing it yourself as the church, be absolutely certain you are aware of the CDC website, its recommendations in that area. Check with an infectious disease physician in your community, with your public health department, for letting them know where you're going, what recommendations they would have to protect against insects, and just building your case that you're using reasonable care. You don't want a $42 million suit for a case, as the plaintiff's attorney said in that Hotchkiss School case, was totally avoidable.
Yeah, and a lot of it was they did not suggest that the kids wear long pants, and they didn't have insect repellent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a camp, have insect repellent around.
Well, and follow the recommendations
of the CDC.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the things, two things in closing. Basically, I'm just going to read a little bit from a parental consent form. We, being the parents of the child listed above, do hereby consent to the participation of our child in the activities of such camp. Activities include camping, hiking, in which participants may be subject to bites from insects, ticks, mosquitoes, spiders, and/or snakes. Will include swimming, basketball, ropes course, recreational games, relay, race style, tug of war involving water and mud, swimming, pool and lake, and canoeing with life jackets required. I hereby represent that the child is in good health and in proper condition to participate in above activities. It also goes further in here, but then it says, we do not authorize our child to participate in the following activities. So kind of what you came up with. One other thing that I'm going to mention is that if you're filming, which a lot of the churches will film all of these kids doing this, they need to have a photograph and video release in order to actually put that out there. And we actually have a photograph and video release that you can use for your camp. So one of the things we've done is help our camps with the consent form. We actually have changed to a parental consent form versus an activity participation agreement. We also helped with a photograph and video release form to help protect our camp. So
maybe in conclusion, Jerry, I would just say, like with all of these presentations that we do every month, yes, there are risks involved in ministry, but that doesn't mean that we don't engage in ministry. It means rather that we manage the risks, and that's what we're here for.
And with that, we're going to conclude. Rich, thank you very much again for this Risk Management Live. We'll see you next month for Risk Management Live. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Rich.